All right, a chance to win some cash in a few minutes. Keyword for cash, but let's get some news right away. So it was a pleasure when the minority leader of the House, Kurt Doubt, is kind enough to join us. Thank you, Kurt, as always.
Good afternoon.
Let's talk about whether you have an agreement here on the public safety police accountability, because you know this better than I. There's been a fair amount of pushback on this. My guy Tom Hauser, has listed a number of the items in this update about where you have agreed, even with some of the pushback. I'll read a few. Regulating the use of no-knock warrants, civil affix forfeiture reforms, grant funding for community violence prevention, survivor support, and sex trafficking prevention response, fines and fees reform, modification of the post-board police misconduct database, create an early warning system, create an office of missing and murdered Indigenous women, creating a task force for missing and murdered African-American women, funding increases for public defenders and legal aid, criminal sexual conduct reform. Those are some of the items. You are aware today that a number of Democrats have pushed back on this idea, including members of the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus. The governor has said recently he agrees with them, but is skeptical of what they could get accomplished. Is there any more wiggle room to get anything else done, and are you worried that this agreement could come undone?
Well, I do understand that there is an agreement, and I think everybody is kind of admitting that there is an agreement. I actually think that, Chad, this is kind of, we've exhausted all opportunities to kind of find any further common ground on this bill. The announcement, I think the language was either posted last night or this morning so people could see it. And obviously today at noon, the Posse Caucus did a press conference saying that they're not happy and they think this should go further. They're blaming the Republicans for not doing as much as they would like. The governor now has since done a press conference saying that unfortunately he believes, I think, that we've exhausted all efforts to try to come to further common ground. And I think the line for Republicans really was we didn't want to do anything that was going to further hinder law enforcement efforts to keep people safe. I think people are already worried about the crime rates in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the shortage of officers there. And I think officers see it as a difficult situation to work in a department where they don't feel like they've got the support and a very clear mission on the ability to keep people safe. And I think that's what we're struggling with right now. So Republicans feel very strongly that we don't want to do anything that's going to weaken the hand of law enforcement officers.
Which particular issues that Democrats raised that eventually you and other Republicans said no to would have made officers less safe?
Well, I think I have heard continually that officers in Minneapolis feel like they don't have a clear mission, like they feel like they have been told not to use force, what do you call catch and release, where they, pull somebody over, but they can't take anybody into custody. They have to just cite them and let them go. Even for charges where you'd expect that normally we would take people into custody. I think those are situations where you're kind of tying the hands of the police. And if they don't feel supported by the leadership in the city or even at the state level in this instance, they're going to think twice about going to work for that community and having less officers. I mean, Minneapolis is down at least 200 officers right now, which equates to about 30% of their police force. That's a big number. And we're seeing homicide rates are double the first 5 months of this year from what they were the first 5 months of last year. So crime rates are spiking, and I don't think taking police officers off the street or tying their hands is going to make the streets of Minneapolis safer. That's our concern.
If you are a person of color and you look at data, and there's a lot out there that shows examples of systemic racism, that by no means every police officer is a racist. The overwhelming number of police officers, in my opinion, are very good, but like a lot of systems, a lot of jobs, a lot of aspects of our country. You're going to have individuals who really aren't up for the job. If you're a person of color and you feel like that nothing changes and that, yes, what happened to Derek Chauvin is a rare sign where a white officer was held accountable, but looks at what took place in St. Paul, if nothing else changes, because it does look like this is it. What do you say to those folks who feel like if the two of us, two white guys, are walking down a street versus two black guys, two black women, that the likelihood they're going to get stopped versus us, that the pattern is out there with some officers, and that this was a way to make things better in light of the death of George Floyd and the momentum for progress, and it just didn't happen?
I think we have to ask ourselves, were these things really going to make it better or safer, or are these things that are just being talked about to appease people in that community to think that we're doing something? I will back you up, Chad, to that this isn't a short-term problem. We can't put a fix in place today that's gonna solve this problem 100% next week. What we need to do is solve the achievement gap, and we have the highest achievement gap in the country. And when I say this statistic, if people didn't know this or didn't realize it, it's shocking. That if you're a minority student in the Minneapolis school district, you have less than a 50% chance of graduating from high school. If we can solve that problem and roll up our sleeves and work together on it, that if somebody has a high school diploma, their chances of incarceration are a fraction of what they are for a student that leaves the system before getting that diploma. I don't think we can solve this problem overnight. Are there some things we can do to make it better right now? Yes. But the real problem is we've got to take a long-term approach, and we've got to solve the achievement gap and give these kids the tools they need to be successful so they don't turn to a life on the streets and not a stable work environment and all of those things that we think give people a much better opportunity to stay out of a confrontation with law enforcement.
So the last thing on this part, even with the protests from the Posse Caucus and others speaking out, you still feel like you have the votes, it's going to be a combination of Republicans and Democrats, that this will be signed off on, and this will be a part of the complete agreement, that this couldn't derail anything with people speaking up?
I believe that it will be. Typically, we have not, in the minority in the House, the Republicans in the House have not really been consulted and included a lot in the negotiations. We have 5 things that we asked for early on. We still would like to see those. The number one thing that we've asked for is reinsurance. Minnesotans that are affected by that are going to see a 30% increase next year in their health insurance rates. It's a big deal. And we've fought really hard for that. We're not sure yet. We haven't decided, are we going to put up the votes for this public safety bill? This really is an agreement between House Democrats and Senate Republicans. And typically, they have to, if they're going to agree to it, they've got to put up the votes for it. And I don't know yet whether they're going to have the votes, and we haven't really talked about whether we'll put up the votes for this agreement.
Is there any other agreement which has been reached that is far enough apart that could derail this from all coming to a conclusion ahead of the deadline, which is Wednesday?
I would say right now that if there was a derailment in an agreement, it would be likely in this public safety bill. And I think if you look at what's funded in this public safety bill, that puts things like the Corrections Department, that's our state prisons, those sorts of kind of law enforcement and public safety aspects, that puts those things at risk. I don't think anybody's really going to hold out and that we wouldn't see funding by the end of the day on Wednesday. But we're pushing the calendar here. I mean, those bills, we've got 2 bills. We won't see the state government finance bill or the tax bill in the House until Wednesday. And that's the last day. We have to have them out and signed by the governor by midnight, or you'll start seeing shutdowns.
So let's talk about emergency powers. This is something the two of us have talked about in interviews many times before. You've made this point in a number of forums that you felt like months and months and months ago the governor should have given up the emergency powers. Now we have a debate over a month. The governor is saying as of August 1st he's done. You and a number of other Republicans, almost all Republicans, believe it should be July 1st. Is this worth jeopardizing everything else that you've accomplished, over a battle like this. And I don't believe you want to give up on the idea, but doesn't he have the sway at this point? Is it worth getting caught up in this argument so much over 30 days compared to what's been going on long for about a year, where you felt like he should have given up the powers? And I should point out again, there's still about 30-some states where the governor in these states, Republicans and Democrats, have the emergency powers. The governor does.
Yeah, so, other states, it's a good comparison to look at. However, every state handles this a little bit differently. So, even New York just this week gave up their emergency powers. So there's many states that are ending their emergency powers. They're doing it voluntarily. Many of them are Democrat governors. So we believe very strongly, and this has nothing to do with partisan issues. It has nothing to do with whether COVID's real or not, or whether the governor handled it properly. This really is just about, should the governor handle this all on his own, or should he work with the legislature together? And we just feel like, the legislature has been in session for the last 5 months or 5.5 months. We were here, we were rolled up, sleeves rolled up, ready to get to work. And I think the governor missed an opportunity to really work together with the legislature and handle this response and kind of conclusion of COVID together. I do understand we're starting to see that there's little tidbits of language showing up in these final bills here and there as they get posted. A lot of the negotiations happen behind closed doors, so you don't always see it. But on the state government finance bill, there is some language now. It has been posted. This bill will be up I'm looking at my notes here. It'll be up in the House on Wednesday. Now, they could amend this and change this language, but right now the language says that upon signing of this bill, or actually presentment of the bill, because to end the emergency powers, the governor does not have to sign that. But upon presentment of the bill to the governor, that the emergency powers would end immediately at that time, which would be on June 30th.
But hasn't he been pretty clear? But hasn't he been pretty clear saying August 1st?
Well, for that bill to get to the governor's desk, it has to pass a Democrat House. So my point to you is, Chad, it looks like Democrats are even now saying, "Hey, looks like it's not going to be August 1st." Now, I'll reserve that on Wednesday we could see some amendments to that language, and maybe that's not the final agreement what we see there. But I am told there is an agreement on the emergency powers, and it will end before August 1st, and that Democrats have consented to that.
I always appreciate your time, sir. Thanks so much.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chad.
The Minority Leader, Kurt Dowd, with us here on CCO. Right now, a chance for you to win $1,000.